is BBC One in the Northwest. Now at 10 o'clock, the BBC News with George Anagaya and Peter Marshall.
Clare Short resigns from a government she says is acting illegally. And it's not just Iraq. She launches a blistering attack on Tony Blair himself.
The Prime Minister, I would say, that he has achieved great things since 1997, but paradoxically, he is in danger of destroying his legacy as he becomes increasingly obsessed by his place in history.
We'll be assessing just how damaging her assault is for Tony Blair. Also tonight, scrapping student tuition fees, a major new policy announcement from the Tories. The first Bali bomb trial. Here's the man accused of planning the carnage. And caught in the middle, how Wayne Rooney is being pulled between club and country.
Here in the northwest, thousands of Vauxhall jobs at Ellesmere Port are secured with an £80 million investment plan. And new government guidelines after a widow learns her husband's brain was used for research without her permission.
Good evening. It was one of the most explosive resignation speeches of recent times. We knew Clare Short had her reservations about policy over Iraq. What we didn't know was the depth of her opposition to the way the whole government was run and to the man leading it. The former International Development Secretary accused the Prime Minister of being obsessed with his own future and being surrounded by a clique ruling by diktat. On Iraq itself, she accused Mr. Blair of deceiving her and the government of acting illegally. First tonight, our political editor, Andrew Marr.
And she's off. This time she really is. After famously not resigning before the war, Clare Short took Tony Blair completely by surprise this morning.
Come on, that must be enough. I'm not getting married.
That's true. And when she arrived in the Commons, she made it entirely clear what she thought of the bloke in question.
To the Prime Minister, I would say that he has achieved great things since 1997, but paradoxically, he is in danger of destroying his legacy as he becomes increasingly obsessed by his place in history.
Ouch! She resigned over what she believes is an illegal British-American plan for setting up a post-war Iraqi government. But that was only the start.
The errors we are making over Iraq and other recent initiatives flow not from Labour's values, but from the style and organisation of our government, which is undermining trust and straining party loyalty in a way that is completely unnecessary. In our first term, the problem was spin, endless announcements, exaggeration and manipulation of the media that undermined people's respect for the government and trust in what we said. It was accompanied by a control freak style.
Bad enough, but as her former staff from the International Aid Department looked on, she told MPs that now the problem was too much power in the hands of the Prime Minister and a clique of his advisers.
Increasingly, those who are wielding power are not accountable and are not scrutinised. Thus, we have the powers of a presidential-type system with the automatic majority of a parliamentary system. My conclusion is that these arrangements are leading to increasingly poor policy initiatives being rammed through Parliament, straining and abusing party loyalty, and undermining the people's respect for our political system.
Earlier, she told me that Tony Blair had broken a promise to her before the war about the United Nations role afterwards, and that the coalition was now breaking international law.
Do you think you were fooled into staying?
Well, I don't know. I was asked, and I think it was the right thing to do. It was right for me to try. It was very unpopular. I've had a nasty time. Sure. But I still think it was the right thing to do, and I have tried my best. But now I'm at the end of the line. What they're doing, I can't defend. I'm ashamed of it.
As Tony Blair's advisers insisted she'd been kept fully in the loop all along, the Prime Minister found himself conveniently hard of hearing today.
Mr. Blair, is Clare Short's resignation an embarrassment for you?
Well, Downing Street's first reaction was to try to flatter Clare Short into relative silence. When that didn't work, ministers stopped trying to hide their anger.
Well, I regret that Clare has resigned, and I still more regret the way in which she has gone about it, because I don't recognise her description of the government that I am proud to be part, nor indeed of the Prime Minister's leadership.
And politics moves briskly on. It took Tony Blair all of 10 minutes this morning to replace Clare Short with the popular and impeccably loyal Baroness Amos, the first black woman in a British cabinet. Because of her agonies of indecision over the war, Clare Short had come to be seen in recent weeks as a bit of a discredited politician. But at least in the eyes of the left, because of what she said today, she has just undiscredited herself. Andrew Marr, BBC News, Downing Street.
The political fallout from Clare Short's resignation is still being felt in Westminster tonight, and we'll have more on that in a moment. But first, the former cabinet minister made clear her immediate reason for going was that Britain and America were not giving the United Nations a central role in Iraq's reconstruction. That, she said, breached international law. James Robbins reports now on Clare Short's legal challenge to Tony Blair.
Clare Short insists only the United Nations has the legal right to settle Iraq's political future, not Britain and the United States as occupying powers. But they are pressing for the UN to have only an advisory role. Clare Short insists Tony Blair was advised by his Attorney General the invasion and occupation of Iraq were not legal unless the UN controlled the political outcome. The Conservatives have seized on the split, challenging the Prime Minister to publish the legal advice.
Unless he publishes that advice now, we must believe Clare Short, in which case the government has acted illegally. Now, we have evidence of previous governments falling, literally falling, on the basis that they have acted illegally because they ignored the advice of the Attorney General. It is that serious.
Clare Short's resignation letter pulls no punches, accusing Tony Blair and Jack Straw directly. The Security Council resolution that you and Jack have so secretly negotiated contradicts the assurances I have given about the legal authority of the occupying powers and the need for a UN-led process to establish a legitimate Iraqi government.
If you support the view that the invasion was a breach of the UN Charter, as Kofi Annan says, then the occupation is illegal until it is authorised by the UN Security Council.
And the Security Council has not yet ruled on the occupation of Iraq. So government ministers insist Clare Short has jumped the gun, prejudging a huge legal issue. James Robbins, BBC News.
It was the ferocity, though, of Clare Short's attack on Tony Blair and his style of government which made the most impact on MPs. Mark Mardell reports now on the speech's political challenge to Tony Blair's authority.
Clare Short has suddenly become Tony Blair's most vocal, most prominent critic. Her performance today won't have won her many friends among Labour MPs. Her natural allies think she should have resigned over the war. Others disapprove of any disloyalty. But persistent rebels say she's spot on.
Her analysis of the nature of this government and the way its contempt for democratic institutions, and then her analysis of the dislocation with the Labour Party, and many people within the Labour Party and who sympathise with it, all of that will resonate throughout the party.
The eyes to the right. The Iraq War and Foundation hospitals provoked big rebellions. Sometimes Mr Blair seems determined to destruction test the party's loyalty. Some insiders worry New Labour's legendary discipline is breaking down. Just after Clare Short made her statement, one MP was telling me how irritated he was, how outrageous he thought she'd been. So it didn't strike a chord at all, I said. Oh yes, it was completely true. We just don't do things like that around here. You don't get things changed like that. Outside the Commons, it may be different. The leader of one of the biggest unions worries the party is ignored when policy is made in Downing Street.
These things need to be handled a little bit more carefully, and the opinion of ordinary rank and file members of the party and indeed members of the public, opinions need to be taken more seriously.
So what do voters make of it all in Clare Short's Birmingham constituency?
She should have stood by what she said last time, rather than carry on. And then, I mean, this was inevitable, it was going to happen.
A last dig at the PM and that's about it. So that's her career gone, I think.
Indeed, but in exile she's still a charismatic, powerful figure, a focus for rebellion, a danger to Mr Blair. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Westminster.
And Andrew Marr is in Downing Street. Now, Andrew, plenty of drama as we've seen today, but what would you say is the lasting impact on Tony Blair?
Well, at this stage, frankly, it's difficult to say. It doesn't really affect the arithmetic of the House of Commons at all, but the government has just lost another vivid, large political character, someone that the public could respond to. I don't think in the end it's the kind of damage that's in any way fatal, of course not. On the other hand, what Clare Short said, there was a sort of shiver of recognition and apprehension around the Labour benches at some of that analysis. And the real danger, I think, is not in losing another minister here or there. The real danger is that people up and down the country listen to what Clare Short said about this government and agree with it. It's the power of her ideas and analysis, not the power of her position as a particular Labour politician that matters.
And Andrew, on Iraq, what about this question of legality that the Tories today are asking to see the legal advice the government got, for example?
And they won't, so far as we can tell. The government is stolidly determined not to publish that legal advice. This is a very, very difficult and complicated question. Lots of international jurists are arguing about it, so far as I can tell, and there is a real disagreement going on. But you put that alongside issues like the continued failure to discover the weapons of mass destruction, and that continues to chip away at Tony Blair's credibility as the man who took Britain into this war with a very specific legal underpinning and a specific agenda on those weapons of mass destruction. It's the kind of thing that just sort of, as I say, chivies away inside the Labour Party and causes long-term problems.
All right, Andrew, don't go away. I want to come back to you on the night's other major political story. In a major policy announcement, the Conservatives have said tonight they will scrap university tuition fees in England and Wales should they win the next election. That would save students and their families up to £3,000 a year. To pay for it, the Tories plan to curb Labour's plans to expand universities. The government says the Tory figures don't add up. Our political correspondent Laura Trevelyan reports.
The thrust of it, no fees, we'd abolish the target.
Damien Green, the Tories' education spokesman, explaining his policy to selected students at Imperial College in London. Once top-up fees are introduced, it could cost £3,000 a year to study here.
We're scrapping a bureaucracy, we're scrapping a tax.
Mr Green says he'd scrap fees. That's already happened in Scotland. He'd pay for it mostly by abolishing Labour's target of getting 50% into higher education.
What we've tried to do over the past few years is pilot high and sell it cheap, and unfortunately we're now piling it high and selling it increasingly expensively. Well, we'll get rid of that. We'll say that instead of this complex, bureaucratic, unfair fees system, university education will be free. There will be less of it than there would be under a Labour government, but it will be properly funded, so it will be meaningful.
Sounds simple, but Labour say the Conservatives' figures just don't add up. And what's more, reducing the numbers at university is a step backwards. The Conservatives, though, calculate there are votes in this from parents worried about debt and students.
It's a good idea in principle, but as long as the university is going to actually get money to actually pay for lecturers and staff and services, it's a good idea.
I think it's probably very good. I think that you should favour, people who don't have that much money to go to university, and top-up fees are really not that good.
Performing arts students at London Metropolitan University. Many here are from less well-off backgrounds, just the people the government's trying to encourage to go into higher education. But the dropout rate on this course was a third. The Conservatives say that shows too many people are doing courses they're not suited to. But one Vice-Chancellor at least takes issue with their plans.
It looks as though there's less resources available to British universities, and that can't be a good thing. Secondly, I'm not so sure how abolishing fees helps poor students who don't pay them anyway. And thirdly, we need to expand British higher education to make us much, much more competitive.
This policy is bound to be popular with many students and their parents, but critics may see it as a gimmick, which doesn't address the real problems at the heart of higher education funding. Laura Trevelyan, BBC News, London.
All right, Andrew, now what about this? Do you think this is a conviction thing, or are the Tories simply going for a policy they know has caused Labour some trouble?
Well, there's nothing entirely wrong in politics in trying to find a popular policy. And really since last October's party conference, the Tories have been promising that they will produce radical and surprising policies on domestic issues which will interest the voters. And this is, I think, the first real big one that we've seen so far. There have been promises for extra police, there have been promises on asylum and so on. But this is rather unexpected for the Tories to actually get rid of tuition fees altogether. And there is a sort of a hard edge to it because they're frankly saying that there are too many university courses up and down the country which aren't worth the paper that they give the students afterwards. So it'll be unpopular, I think, with a lot of the smaller universities, the less well-funded universities, but it will be extremely popular with a lot of families up and down the country wondering how they're going to pay these fees. As I say, it is the first policy that Ian Duncan Smith's Tory party has produced that is going to have some resonance on the doorsteps.
All right, Andrew, that is your lot tonight. Thank you. Still to come on tonight's 10 o'clock news. Codename Steak Knife. Did British intelligence help its #1 spy inside the IRA commit terrorist acts? And a British charity offers new hope for Heba Jassim, the Iraqi baby fighting for her life. The chief executive of General Motors, the world's biggest company, has joined the debate on the euro. Rick Wagoner told the 10 o'clock news that whether Britain was in or out was not a major factor in his investment decisions. The GM boss was in Britain to announce that the new Vauxhall Astra would be built at Ellesmere Port, safeguarding 3,000 jobs.
He'd come to celebrate Vauxhall's centenary by unveiling a concept car. But the boss of General Motors was also stepping into the euro debate as he announced a new investment in his UK subsidiary. £80 million is being spent at Ellesmere Port to enable workers here to make the new Vauxhall Astra from next year. Just the kind of investment some fear will vanish if Britain doesn't join the euro. But the boss of the world's biggest manufacturing firm says that wasn't a do-or-die issue and insists the overall health of the economy is more important.
The UK economy has really performed quite well over the last several years. In fact, frankly, better than continental Europe. Obviously somebody's doing something right here, and currency valuations are not irrelevant, but that's not the whole game. If you can keep strong economic growth, that helps a lot.
In the long term, Mr. Wagoner says entering the euro would remove uncertainty, but it's not an issue which keeps him awake at night. Car companies look pretty far into the future when making investment decisions. General Motors has done just that and has decided that the euro isn't a major factor. Other car makers take a different view. Ford is among the companies which have signed a letter urging the Prime Minister not to shut the door to euro entry in this Parliament. They warn they can't afford to watch sterling bounce up and down.
When you're a global company, currency plays a huge part in particularly manufacturing industry where margins are quite small. If you're getting 10, 15% swings every 2 years, that's not a stable platform on which to plan a business.
Weighing up what the euro would mean for investment is one of the Chancellor's 5 tests. But from the car industry, there's no very clear answer. Rory Catlin-Jones, BBC News.
New laws are to be put in place to prevent organs being removed from bodies for medical research without proper consent. The legislation was announced in response to an inquiry into the unlawful removal of brains at hospitals in the Manchester area. The report said there were at least 20,000 brains in storage in England which were retained improperly. A leading member of the IRA remains in hiding tonight after he was named as the British Army's top agent within the organisation. It's been alleged that Freddie Scappaticci, codenamed Steak Knife, was a British spy for 25 years. The Irish Premier, Bertie Ahern, has said he will question the British government about the case and the extent to which the British Secret Service may have colluded in terrorist violence.
This man, Alfredo Scappaticci, is alleged to have been at the heart of Ulster's so-called Dirty War. Seen here at a Republican funeral, it's claimed he was actually Agent Steak Knife. Steak Knife was Britain's most important spy inside the IRA. But if his cover has been blown, there is now a real risk that some of the darkest secrets of the Troubles will come out. Scappaticci, who lives here in West Belfast, is said to have gone into hiding in Britain. This is what is now being said about Steak Knife. He spied for the British since 1978. And he was one of the IRA's key men in hunting down informers. And it's claimed he was paid £80,000 a year by the British to be an informer.
He certainly had an insight into the manner in which the IRA was run, its weaknesses, its strengths. He had a knowledge of it geographically. There's no quicker way around the IRA than through its security department.
Two serious questions arise from this. Were the lives of innocent people, including soldiers and policemen, sacrificed to protect his cover? And what was the extent of the collusion between British intelligence and paramilitary death squads? Already today, some were calling for an investigation into these revelations.
We've already had a long and serious list of accusations which raise issues of a fundamental nature. Issues regarding accountability and in some cases the rule of law itself.
For 14 years, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir John Stevens, has been investigating the extent to which British intelligence colluded in murders in order to protect its agents. Sir John is now likely to want to interview Stakeknife in the near future. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
To Indonesia now, where the trial has begun of a man accused of plotting the Bali bombing, which killed more than 200 people last October. 26 of them were British. The attack devastated the island's tourist industry. A 40-year-old mechanic from Java called Amrozi is charged with buying the explosives and the van used in the attack. Jonathan Head in Bali saw the trial start.
A heavily armoured convoy bringing the single defendant into court through rings of high security. The Bali bomb has now awoken Indonesia to the dangers in its midst. But terrorism wears many faces. Here it's a Muslim mechanic called Amrozi, an Indonesian village boy who learnt his hatred of the West when he went abroad. This, says the prosecution, was the horrifying result of his indoctrination. A massive car bomb, built, they say, with chemicals bought by Amrozi. It tore the heart out of Bali's busiest tourist district. So feelings here run very high. This silent vigil outside the court, a show of local resolve to see those who destroyed their economy punished. Despite the stifling security, there is a palpable sense of relief here that the trial they and the families of the victims have been waiting for is finally underway. With the world's eyes on Bali once again, this time they hope the tourists may be persuaded to start coming back to their island. Until that happens, their only comfort is throwing abuse and anything else at the televised image of Amrozi. The death penalty's too good for him, says Nilu Mendri. The bomb left her a widow. If indeed he did help carry out the Bali atrocity, Amrozi seems to feel little remorse over it. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Bali.
There's new hope tonight for a 4-month-old Iraqi baby who's dying of a congenital heart condition. A British charity has flown Heba Jassim to Kuwait, where she'll be assessed before being flown to Britain later in the week for surgery. Heba's case, which was reported by the 10 o'clock news last week, has been taken up by the Chain of Hope charity.
Heba Jassim's heart is failing. To have any chance of survival, she needs surgery now. But the Baghdad Heart Hospital is out of action. We reported on Heba's plight on last Wednesday's 10 o'clock news. Within minutes, a British charity, Chain of Hope, stepped in.
You can see the jets of colour showing the flow of blood.
American military doctors were persuaded to assess her. Their dilemma, could she possibly withstand a flight out of this broken city? The answer, yes, she could. Today, her mother, Ikhlas, took Heba away from Qadisiyah Hospital, while other mothers with desperately sick children proffered them to me. The scale of Baghdad's healthcare crisis is heartbreaking. Baby Heba was escaping the stinking garbage, the power cuts and filthy water in our car. Ikhlas was nervous, but determined to seize this only chance for her baby. We headed for the airport, past symbols of a regime which delivered so much misery. America's post-war strategy in Iraq hasn't taken off, helping this one Iraqi family, seen by America and Britain today as a welcome opportunity in troubling times. Heba's father, Jassim, embraced me. Then this desperately poor family, who'd never been on a plane before, began their extraordinary journey.
In a couple of hours, Heba should be in Kuwait. She'll be held there for a couple of days, strengthened up a bit, and then escorted to London. This is the story of one child who's been offered a lifeline by outside intervention. But it's impossible to forget that there are countless other Iraqi children in dire medical need. The only long-term solution has to be massive investment in the Iraqi public health system.
Heba left Iraq with her future and that of her country clouded in uncertainty. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Baghdad.
England's rising football star Wayne Rooney is tonight at the centre of a row which has pitted his club against his country. The England manager Sven-Göran Eriksson wants Rooney to play in a friendly against South Africa next week, but his club, Everton, insists the teenager has injured his knee and shouldn't play.
Off target, but still in demand. The Everton manager is adamant that an injury picked up in this incident should rule Wayne Rooney out of international duty. England, though, are not taking Everton's word for it.
I hope, of course, that he can travel to South Africa, because I think it should be very, very good for him. Every day he can be together with the other players. He comes into the family even more. But if the doctors decide that it's better that he work at home, okay.
The Rooney row is clear evidence that the England manager is not afraid to assert his authority over clubs. If Eriksson wants him, he'll select him.
And still.
The England players will gather here at the team hotel in Hertfordshire on Sunday. Whatever Everton say, Sven-Göran Eriksson wants Wayne Rooney here so that England doctors can make their own assessment of his fitness. But as club and country haggle over the young player, one England veteran has fallen decidedly out of favour.
Oh, it's gone straight in!
This match and this mistake against Macedonia could be David Seaman's last in an England shirt. He's not been selected for the next batch of internationals, so often England's saviour, his time may be up. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
And I'll be back a little later with an update on the day's headlines, but now we join our news teams across the UK.
Good evening, I'm Peter Marshall. Workers in the region's motor industry are tonight welcoming news that the new Vauxhall Astra is to be built at Ellesmere Port in Cheshire. General Motors says it's investing £80 million in the plant. The move will secure 3,000 jobs. Andy Gill reports.
The news Vauxhall workers were waiting for was delivered 200 miles away from Cheshire, General Motors briefing the stock exchange in London first. But word quickly reached workers here.
It's great news, I think, for the plants and Ellesmere Port. It's good for the British industry.
Ellesmere Port currently makes the Astra and Vectra models, and senior managers are warning the workers that there's no room for teething troubles with the new Astra, as there were when the new Vectra was launched.
There's competitors who are coming out of different cost environments, and we need to just keep improving and making sure that we're aware of those competitive challenges. So I would say Ellesmere Port has opportunities to continue to improve its productivity and needs to keep working on that.
Vauxhall haven't released any pictures of the new Astra yet, but it's going to look very different from existing models. It'll be aimed at a younger market, people in their early 20s who are ambitious, so it's going to look sporty compared to its predecessors. That's something one industry expert says is just what Vauxhall need.
They're a company which desperately needs new product. They've got the Vectra into the marketplace. That isn't a big success. They definitely need a sexy successor to the car behind us, the Astra.
The new Astra will be on sale next spring.
Lawyers representing the serial killer Harold Shipman say they're collecting evidence which could prove his convictions are unsafe. They believe the way post-mortem results from his victims were presented in court was flawed. The legal team says despite objections from his victims' families, Shipman is within his rights.
If there are arguable grounds for an appeal, why should Dr. Harold Shipman be excluded simply because of the alleged offences? That would be wholly wrong, and I don't think that even the relatives of the victims could even consider that British law wouldn't be applied.
The government has promised new measures to prevent scientists using the organs of the dead without their families even knowing about it. It follows a report into the case of Cyril Isaacs from Prestwich, whose brain was passed to researchers at Manchester University without his wife's permission. Carol Lowe reports.
In 1987, Cyril Isaacs committed suicide. After a post-mortem at Prestwich Hospital, his brain was given to medical researchers. His wife Elaine only found out what had happened 2 years ago.
In a case like ours, it's just gone straight for research, which is, you know, against the Human Tissue Act, it's against the coroner's rules, and there was no need because it wasn't required for establishing the cause of death.
A report into his case says that from 1985, hundreds of brains were kept for research from post-mortems in the Manchester area without the knowledge of relatives. Mr Isaacs' brain was kept here at Manchester University Medical School. The government has apologised for what happened.
These practices belong to the past, and we've made clear within the NHS that these sorts of practices are now completely unacceptable.
Manchester University today issued a statement saying, since that time the university has very substantially enhanced its ethical approval procedures to ensure that comparable incidents cannot recur. A helpline has been set up for families who have been or think they may have been affected. The free phone number is 0800 838 909 and will be open for the next fortnight.
A man who used an air rifle to shoot passers-by on a busy road in Blackburn has been jailed for 2 years. Preston Crown Court heard how 36-year-old Ian Taylor shot 3 men and a woman from the window of a second-floor flat. Taylor, who's from Blackburn, was arrested by an armed response unit which was called to the scene. Merseyside police are trying to trace 2 men who robbed a newsagent at gunpoint. They locked him in his shop in Stanley Road in Bootle before escaping with cash on Friday. The men fled down a nearby side street. The Barrow MP John Hutton is pushing a campaign to save the North West shipbuilding industry. He's been trying to win support from a number of other politicians who've been visiting the town's shipyard today. BAE wants to move production of the Type 45 destroyer from Barrow to the Clyde. The North West otters population is on the increase. The Environment Agency and the Wildlife Trust say the animals are returning to parts of North Lancashire and South Cumbria. The increase is being put down to improvements in water quality. Now here's a story to warm your cockles. It concerns Zach, a 2-year-old terrier who was buried beneath mounds of earth when he stuck his head down a foxhole in Manchester's Clifton Country Park. Thankfully, he was saved by firefighters, the RSPCA and a timely bark, as Philip Bromwell reports.
Friends reunited, 10-year-old Dylan and 2-year-old Zach. Happy enough now, but it was a different story when Zach went missing.
I felt sad and upset, and everyone else was upset. I didn't know where he was and what happened to him, so I was scared really of him hurting himself.
Zach was in a hole, quite literally. This area of earth on the banks of the River Irwell was excavated to get him out again.
He was about to give up. They said, we've been digging, you know, we can't hear him. He's more than likely if he's in there, like dead. So I thanked him and said, well, you've done your best. And the next thing, a fireman said, I can hear something. So the RSPCA lady jumped down, I jumped down, and we could hear him barking. So I said, oh, yeah, I can hear him. So anyway, they started digging and digging and digging, and he finally come out.
After a shampoo and a good meal, Zach was back, although he'll be on a lead for the time being.
Lucky little doggy. And on to the weather. Showers this evening, some of them heavy with possible thunder. Lowest temperature 5 Celsius. Tomorrow bright spells but also plenty of rain, again heavy at times. Top temperature 12. The outlook for Wednesday, isolated showers in the morning but mainly fine in the afternoon. Top temperature 13. That's it from me. Now back to George Allegaya in London. Good night.
The main news tonight. Clare Short, the International Development Secretary, has resigned. In a blistering personal attack, she accused Mr Blair of ruling by diktat and being obsessed with his place in history. She's also accused Tony Blair of breaking his promises over Iraq and putting Britain in breach of international law. But in a statement tonight, Lord Goldsmith, the Attorney General, said he was satisfied Britain was acting within international law. Newsnight is starting now over on BBC Two, but from the 10 o'clock news, good night.
Good
Good evening to you. Not much like late spring at the moment. Yes, we had some snow today, and in the next few nights I think we're going to have some frost, so don't necessarily put those bedding plants in just yet. What's going to happen in the next few days is that we start off with areas of low pressure, one to the north, one to the south. They both gave us some heavy rain and showers today. Those will move away. A little bit of a ridge of high pressure comes in from the west, but don't get too excited. It's getting squeezed out of the way. It's not going to last long, and towards the end of the week and into the weekend, back to square one, low pressure on the doorstep, keeping the weather unsettled and indeed often wet and windy. There is some sunshine to be found down over Spain, but as we move across France into the thicker cloud, and then loads and loads of showers across the British Isles. Well, actually, we weren't alone, because look at this over Europe. All these orange zigzags there, they show where there were thunderstorms this afternoon. There was a real crop of them just about across the whole of certainly Central and Western Europe and down into North Africa as well. Our showers got going shortly after sunrise, and we had loads and loads of them. We even had some more general outbreaks of thundery rain in the southeastern corner of the country. We still have a couple of storms rumbling off the Norfolk coast as I speak, but they're all fading, and I think for many parts it is going to end up a fine and dry night. Showers will continue in that northern part of Scotland and running in along and near to those western coasts, but inland a fairly chilly night. Might have actually managed a touch of frost even tonight in some of those eastern parts of Scotland. And it should be the eastern and central areas that start off bright tomorrow with the best of the sunshine. In the north and the west, showers right from the word go, and it isn't going to take much, just like this morning, for those showers to get going again, and many of them could well be heavy and indeed thundery, with some hail mixed in for good measure, joining forces to give some longer spells of rain, and all those showers blown on by quite strong west to northwesterly winds. In the latter part of the day, I think the showers will begin to fade from the west and get lighter and more scattered, but temperatures nothing to write home about. Feeling decidedly chilly, I would feel, in that northern part of the country, especially in that strong wind. As for Wednesday, well, still showers in the more eastern areas, I think, the odd heavy one here and there. But as far as the west is concerned, that's probably going to be the best day of the week, staying mostly dry and fairly sunny. And then things shuffle around on Thursday, because it looks as if it's the east turn to get the best of the weather. In the west, there'll be some outbreaks of rain spreading in during the course of the day. The wind will be freshening again. And by the time we move into Friday, it's a case of rain moving across all parts, followed by a return of those brighter conditions with blustery showers. A very good night to you.